Welcome to The End of the Line, an experiential evening on the grief of childlessness, with Sophy Banks, Jody, Alison Heatherington, and Dita Vizoso. Sophie is speaking to the universality of intention, of the elements of fire and water.
And for some of us, it may be something that's completely unfamiliar. But inviting it, and even if the elements of fire and water don't mean anything to you, inviting something about beauty, that might be another little bank of the river. So Dita, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Welcome everyone from me. So as Sophie said, this is just how I do it, and it might mean something different for you. I just want to invite those who have a candle to light it now together, and those who don't have a candle, Sophie will share her candle with everyone. And as we light the candle, just think of a quality that you associate with fire, with light, that can support you, that can help transform the grief that you have. And just murmur it for yourself as you light the candle. So we have this enormous shrine together, it's spanning perhaps several continents. I call in the quality of transformation, fire that burns and brings light and warmth. In some cultures, they are very aware of how to bring a different quality that comes with water, and how some of our societies have perhaps too much fire. So it's always good to have some water. And again, if you don't have water yourself, Sophie's going to share that with you. So in all our altars or shrines, or your corner for support that you have, I pour some water and call in the quality of movement, of soothing, of coolness. And as Sophie was saying, this may have a different meaning for everyone. We all have ancestors one way or another, but many of us are finding our ways to that wisdom. This is every time an experiment. I think if it comes from the heart, it's a beautiful experiment.
So I'm going to bring my screen back over here, but my candle and water are still there. And I wonder if you feel to, do you want to just share in the chat the qualities that you called in? It'd be lovely just to see what we're calling in as a circle, just to add into the chat window that's there. Beautiful. Warmth, connection, transformation, sunset on golden fields, purification, cooling, creativity, grit, openness, truth, passion, flow, phoenix, illumination. Beautiful. So imagining all those qualities coming in. Actually, it'd just be lovely to hear you, Jody. I know we're going to invite you to speak, but it'd be lovely just to hear you. And then we're going to go into a little breakout room so that people can meet each other. But just welcoming you, and would you like to just say hi, how you're doing?
Hi, thanks, Sophie. It's a great honour to be here, and it's lovely to be alongside Alison. We've known each other right since almost the beginning of Gateway Women. So we've been on this journey together for a long time. And yeah, my words were purification and flow. And for me, my experience of grief, and I think someone wrote the phoenix as well. And I think sometimes there is a ferocity in the fire of grief. Purification is not is not a pain-free process. And so I honor every woman who is here this evening, who has the courage to honor that fire in herself. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. So Dita's going to do that magic thing that you can do on Zoom, which is to put us into little groups. We're going to go into breakout groups. And the invitation when you're in a breakout group, we're going to be in threes. It's just to say your name and place. Where are you? Just name one thing that's supporting you. So maybe that thing that came to you as we were opening, could be something different. And just take a couple of minutes, maybe just to share something. I know it's just going to be a little taste, but something about your journey of childlessness.
So this is a beautiful poem which I found, which really speaks to me something of grief and something of grief tending. So I hope you enjoy it. It's called The Unbroken, and it's by Rashani Rhea. There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart, as we break open to the place inside which is unbreakable and whole while learning to sing.
Thank you so much, Alison. It's such a beautiful poem, and I love the way you read it. Now we're going to have an open conversation between Sophy, Jody, Alison, and perhaps me. And I'll just try, I'm sure they have amazing things to say, and I'll try to, if they go off a tangent or we're running out of time, I'll try to shorten it, but I hope you enjoy it. Sophy, if you would like to start us off.
Thank you, Dita. I just want to say we're going to do this bit, which is about speaking to grief, and especially the specific grief, meeting the many different experiences of childlessness, and then we're going to do a little experiential exercise. So we're going to do this, and then that's when the opportunity will come to do a bit more sharing together. But I feel like my sort of role in this is to speak about grief. And my journey with holding grief workshops, we sometimes speak about the idea of apprenticing to grief. So this comes from one of our teachers, Francis Weller. And I feel like it's been a really interesting journey to work with grief and feel grief as a teacher. So I'm just going to speak a bit about what I feel I've been learning as I've been working with grief. And then we're going to sort of, hear Jody speak about how she's worked with it, particularly in this field of around childlessness, and then just see where our conversation goes. We haven't rehearsed this, so we don't know what's going to come out of our mouths or how the conversation will go, but hopefully it will feel kind of alive and have some energy. So my first thing that I want to speak about is this question: what is grief? And I feel like grief is something that's really just starting to break through much more into public awareness in this country, in the UK. So there's programs on grief on Radio 4, people are starting to give more talks about it, writing books about it. And often when people speak about grief, they're really speaking about sadness, and they're speaking about the sadness of bereavement, of when somebody's died. It's like that's the little pocket of grief where we're allowed to be sad, we're allowed to have negative feelings. And one of the things that I really love about the work that I've been doing and the teachers that I've learned from is to sort of open this doorway of grief and make it a really big doorway. So one of the first things for me is to say that for me, grief isn't just about sadness, it's also about all the other feelings that might be painful. So for me, grief is also about our rage and our outrage, our disappointment. It's about our fear and anxiety. It's about our confusion or bewilderment. It's about our numbness. So for me, I love the idea that we can include, when we do grief work, the place in us that feels so overwhelmed that we've just shut down and something has frozen. And this big doorway of grief can welcome that as well. For me, grief also includes those feelings of guilt or shame, and the feeling of overwhelm itself, the feeling of emptiness, of hollowness, of falling. So I love this idea that it's a big doorway. And sometimes when we're working, we often have this idea of a shrine, like a place to take our grief to, and that idea of welcoming, what's welcome there. And for me, sometimes we can't even tell whether we're feeling the grief or the joy. You know, is it that wing of the bird? That's the grief wing. Sometimes the happiness or the intensity of our longing and our love is what comes when we go through that doorway towards our grief. And I love this idea that there's really no separation. And that, for me, that word longing sometimes can be what connects, you know, our love, the intensity of what we know would be beautiful, and the grief of not having it. So for me, grief, part of opening the doorway of grief is this many, many feelings. And then I also love the teachers that make the doorway a big doorway by naming that there's many sources. And I worked with the ideas of Francis Weller, and he talks about 5 gateways, and I can see how those have touched me just even on my journey with childlessness. So one gateway is this gateway of loss, you know, but that loss can also be the identity that never came into being, the loss of a life that never got lived, the loss of the children that never came, that we longed for. And a second gateway, a second kind of source of grief can be the pain that I experienced. He calls it the places that have not known love. So part of my journey was to find that there was so much brokenness in me that actually I didn't feel fit to be a mother until I'd really healed myself. So this doorway of grief that opens us up to what we've experienced that has hurt us, and that may be things that are traumatic, it may be things that we don't even remember, but somewhere there can be a space for that to be welcomed as well. And when I touched into that in my own journey, what I found was that actually part of the picture was that my mother had had a deeply unhappy childhood, and her mother had had one. And I could see that this line of unmothered children went back in my family. And actually there was an ancestral pattern of unmothered children and trauma around childbirth and wars that had impacted the women in the families, and the shame of illegitimacy and being in service, being servants, who became pregnant and got kicked out of the, you know, so there was this whole sort of thread going back in time, which touched things about class, about gender, you know, but also things around colonialism will be there for some of us. So this ancestral pain, this ancestral trauma is another gateway to grief, and our experiences of becoming a mother or not becoming a mother will be touched by that wider historic and sort of social context in which that happens. Another gateway that Francis identifies as sorrows of the world, and I feel like at the moment, because of some of the work I do, I meet lots of young people, even as young in their 20s, who are choosing not to have children because of the state of the world, that they don't feel that they want to bring children into a world where there's so much uncertainty about the future, about whether there'll be a future, is how some of them are seeing it, and where there's so much suffering, so much inequality. That may also be a thread for some of us. So this sense that we also look out at the wider world and we feel the sorrows of that. And for me, each of these gateways teaches us part of what it is to be a human being. So this sense that grief can be a teacher, not just about the particular sorrows that I have, but teaches me some aspect of being human, about our longings, about our idea of what it is, about how it is to go through life stages and to let go of the dreams or the roles or the things that we had at each stage, and how particular that is for us women, those of us that are women, that our bodies have these moments when we transition whether we're ready or not. So there's this whole time of possibility, diminishing possibility, and then an end to it. And the last gateway that Francis names that I think is really interesting, he says, so what I expected and did not receive. And for me, this gateway opens us up not only into the sense of the life that I longed for that didn't happen, but also it says something about what we expect when we have a grief. So I believe, this is my personal belief, that we're wired to expect our grief to be received and to be a medicine, not only for ourselves, but for others. So, you know, I think it's a really interesting question. Why did humans evolve to have tears, to have sorrow, to have emotions? And I don't know if any of you've seen that film. I can't remember, my memory is not so great as it was, about the little girl who's always looking for joy, and it shows the inner life of her emotions, and the joy keeps pushing the grief out. Someone's going to remind me what it's called. Inside Out, is that what it's called? Yeah. And it's not until she hits a crisis and a conflict with her parents that actually she needs her tears and her unhappiness to do a job that her joy can't do, which is to reconnect a relationship that's been broken. And I think that film is a beautiful, just a tiny glimpse of the purpose of our tears, our grief, but also our anger, our fear, our numbness, our overwhelm. When we open the doors to that, and when we do that in community with others, which is the work that I've been doing and feel really passionate about doing, what I've seen is that our grief becomes a medicine for somebody else. And for me, I believe that we're wired to do that, and we expect that to happen. So when we have something that happens to us or that doesn't happen to us, and there's a grief, there's often a second layer of grief, which is that our grief wasn't received, that there wasn't a place for it, that there wasn't a loving circle that heard us and responded to us. And maybe there's nothing that can be done, but maybe there's something that our grief for childlessness or for something else would evoke in our community of support, a welcome into the circle of holding other children, you know, support to find a different pathway that let our lives be rich and meaningful. But the first bit of response is that our grief would be welcome, and it would be seen as part of our strength and our beauty, that we have this longing to pour ourselves out as mothers, to support and hold the next generation, and that the loss of that and the fact of the loss of that would be something that would be seen and appreciated about us, something that would connect us back with people instead of separating us from it. And for me, one of the most common experiences that I hear from people when they come to grief tendings is, everywhere that I go, I feel like I'm too intense, I'm too much for people, that my grief is too much and that I shouldn't bring it. And it's so relieving to be in a circle where actually somebody says, thank you. And for me, this is part of the kind of cultural pattern that I feel like I'm trying to discover and reweave and put back, because I think it's one of the most essential things that we need to rebuild community. So for me, life is always bringing us grief, and we have these huge griefs about lost dreams and about, you know, identities and crisis or major upheavals in our lives. But even the everyday little griefs push us out of life a little bit, and we need to keep on being called back and welcomed with our pain, with our suffering, with our joy and our strength and our love. so that we reweave our circles as human beings. So that's my little opening bit. I feel incredibly privileged to have done this work. I'm just going to drop in the last bits. Alison said, I used to be an engineer, and the engineer in me loves the idea that grief, pain, suffering is also a feedback loop. You know, it's information about what's happening in our human systems. And who could ever have thought that we would create a society where we don't want to listen to that? You know, who could think that we could be so crazy as to think that hearing our pain is an important part of understanding what's happening in our communities? And yet what I see when I look around me is that we'll culturally, in my English, British, middle class, white culture at least, maybe different in your culture, we'll do anything with our pain other than sit together and give it a space. You know, and yet that is the thing that I see, that I long for, that others really long for. So I'm super excited to be with so many of you. So wonderful to meet you, Jody, and hear a bit about your work. And I'd love to just hear you speak about, you know, how grief and childlessness, how those things move for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I absolutely resonate with you around the sense of how much is being lost on an individual level and on a cultural level by our, I was going to say unwillingness, but it's more than unwillingness, our almost phobia against allowing grief to be spoken. And I talk about the grief of childlessness, which is called a disenfranchised grief, which basically means it's a grief that's not allowed to be spoken. And there are many forms of disenfranchised grief. Childlessness is one of them. Is that I see it almost as, I see grief, and I'm not the only person who's come to this realization, as a form of love. That because grief is created by love. And when I realized that, it gave me permission myself to allow myself to grieve, because I thought, this is how much I loved those children that are not in my life. The size of my grief is the size of my love. It's the size of my heart. And when I realized that, I stopped trying to find ways to stop my grief. I realized that actually what I had to do was I had to open my heart, that this was love. And I've come to understand grief as sort of the shadow side of love. And I imagine it as like the sun and the moon, that we have to go right the way through the cycle. We have to go through the dark part of the moon to come back out when the moon is full again and bright. That you can't have one without the other. We cannot have love without grief. And we cannot have life without loss. And it may sound a little melodramatic, but life is a continual process of loss. And when we, in a way, I guess, stop being surprised by that, although, you know, it is human nature and my nature that, you know, usually I get to a point where I think, well, everything's fine now. And then life goes, whoop, there goes the rug again. And then I'm like, what was I thinking? You know, but it's my passion for grief is driven by the way it has transformed my life and has transformed the lives of so many women who have come into contact with my work, because I've come to see grief as a loving friend that actually is there to heal my broken heart. It is there to help me through the identity transformation that is presented by the irrevocable loss of childlessness. And I found that by stopping seeing grief as an enemy and starting to see it as a loyal and loving friend that is here to help, has enabled me to learn how to support grief rather than try and reject it. And the most important thing I found, as Sophie said, is being able to talk about it with people who don't try to shut me up, who don't tell me it's a problem, who don't tell me I should be over my childlessness, whatever it is, and don't tell me I'm too intense and, really, you need to lighten up because, you get me on this subject and we're going to go deep, people, buckle up. And by being in a safe space and sharing our grief and all the different flavors of our grief, not only do we learn so much about each other, not only do we learn so much about what it means to be human, but we create an incredible intimacy. The conversations we can have take us to a level of love that we are also crying out for. Because for me, the love that I longed to give to my children, before I understood I was grieving and before I started to experiment with things, I felt it was actually going toxic inside me, that love, that it was eating me alive, and it was going to have me. And it was only when I realized I was grieving, and that took a few years because I wasn't hearing it from the medical profession, from the therapy profession, from Dr. Google, from anyone. But once I knew I was grieving, I was on the path to healing because I had love on my side again, the love of my children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Yeah, I was wondering, there's so much also you have written, Jody, about the different ways of childlessness. I don't know if you want to talk about a bit. I know it for myself. I have had a journey with childlessness that actually includes several doorways. But I know you have this beautiful part of your book. I don't know if you want to speak some to that.
It's actually started as a blog that I wrote, and I called it 50 Ways Not to Be a Mother. And it developed and became part of the first self-published edition of my book back in 2013. And the extraordinary thing is that the journalist in me, it was 50 Ways Not to Be a Mother with apologies to Paul Simon, that then had to come out when it became a book published by a publisher because the sub-editors didn't know who Paul Simon was. So, but it could easily have been 100. And in the second edition of my book and the third edition of my book, I have expanded it and tried to include as many ways as possible. And I think all of us, they on the grief tending community have shared a free link so you can download the chapter that this section is in. And I think one of the things that's so important and is still not really out there yet in society is that actually 80% of women who find themselves without children at midlife are childless by circumstance. We understand that some women struggle to have children through fertility or medical issues. That's 10%. We understand that some women choose not to have children who are child-free. That's another 10%. 80% are childless by circumstance. Those circumstances, they're not just one circumstance. They often stack on top of each other to just sort of come in the way of you and your desire for motherhood. I've heard some already from, what Sophie was saying about, a difficult childhood. I started up until I was 29. I was sure I didn't want children because I didn't want to repeat my childhood, and I didn't want to repeat my mothering. I hadn't thought it through, but it was there. I had an abortion when I was 20. I got pregnant, and my lovely partner at the time was happy to have the child and for us to get married, and I was freaked out. And I didn't even know really what freaked me out about it. I was just terrified of ruining my life by having a child, because that was the message I'd got from my family, from my mother, from my community, from my school. So there's a circumstance, the cultural milieu around you. I wasn't able to conceive when I did start to try when I was 29. So then I had infertility mixed in. I broke up with my husband because of his addiction issues. So then we have mental health and physical conditions and chronic conditions layering in. I was then, you know, I then didn't realize, but I'd gone into a slightly early menopause. So actually it was game over for me then. There was ignorance involved. I didn't know that IVF fails 75% of the times. And by the time you're 40, it fails 95% of the times. You know, so there's so many layers of not meeting a partner. I didn't meet a partner after I split up with my husband that it was possible to even try IVF with, although it wouldn't have worked. And I think the issues for women who are childless by circumstance, you know, who form many, many of those 50 ways, are still hidden. And I think the issue of not finding a partner during those fertile years and actually remaining single when that's not your choice is a huge, what I see as a huge issue of shame attached to it. Because within a patriarchal culture, if you are heterosexual, there's still this thing of being chosen. And what I see in the childless by circumstance women I know who are single is often what they chose was not to be in a bad relationship and not to have a baby with someone who they felt in their heart would not be a good father. And these to me are deeply maternal, deeply responsible, ethical and moral decisions that I would like to see understood as that rather than seen as some kind of failing on the part of women, which just makes me furious. Not just as a feminist, but also with my mother's heart. Yeah. So that's a little bit, I could do a whole webinar on that, so I'll just stop now. Thank you, Dita.
Thank you, Jody. Yeah, I'm aware of the time that we want to do a little bit of practice, but I was wondering if, Alison, if you want to add something, or Sophie, if you want to add something before we move on. Thank you so much, Jody.
Yes, thank you, Jody and Sophie. What you just spoke about, Jody, really strikes a chord with me, because that is my lived experience. The childless through the circumstance of not having a partner, and the shame is huge around it. You know, I've done a lot of work on self-forgiveness, because a big part of my anger, I realised, was turned in on myself, and there was a sense of, what is wrong with me? You know, there must be something unlovable about me, that nobody has found me to be someone they want to have children with. So, and then, you know, I did a lot of work around that, and I realised that so much of it is down to luck. You know, who you meet, what your situation is, that sort of thing. So that was a big deal. But even now, I would say the shame is a factor for me. So, for example, if I'm sharing my story with someone I don't know, I may share the fact that I'm childless and that this is a source of grief for me, but I probably won't share the reason for my childlessness. I will let that person make an assumption about, and the assumption everybody comes to is that it's a medical issue. And so this is a sort of, I think the shame is still present, you know, because I know that if I explain my situation, there would be judgment, there would be a lack of empathy, because that is what I've experienced time after time. So, so there's still a lot that needs to be done. Just quickly, there's two other things I'd really like to mention. The first of which is men. Today, I don't know if people are aware, but we're in World Childless Week, and today's theme day is all about men. Men matter too. Men's stories of childlessness matter. And I think, you know, for all the difficulty we have as women in sharing our grief, in finding a safe space in which to share our grief, I think it could be even harder for men to find a place in which to grieve their childlessness. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to just mention is, aside from the sort of the core loss of childlessness, the grief of not having a child, I've been dealing with, and I'm sure many of you have, so many secondary losses. So often the loss of friendships, long-term friendships, people that we thought we'd spend our whole lives with. And when they have a family, their life changes in a different direction from ours, and perhaps they're not able to empathize with our journey. The loss of family relationships, the loss of career, the loss of identity and purpose, the loss of money, perhaps the loss of our health. The list goes on and on. So, you know, so there's a lot in here for us to be grieving for. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sophie, do you want to add something, or do you want to move on to the shuttle exercise?
I think I just wanted to add one tiny piece that takes us towards the shuttles, which is something about grief tending together. And there's something about it I just wanted to drop in about that often when we're feeling that sense of being overwhelmed by grief, like the feeling is of my longing to be held, or my overwhelm, you know, and I sometimes I feel it in myself as a movement to just fall down with the grief that I'm carrying. And part of what amazes me every time we create a grief tending circle, whatever the griefs are that are coming, is how quickly somebody who's falling down with grief can stand up and then be the support for the next person. And there's something that's just really extraordinary. And again, it's sort of, it makes me think we're wired for it, you know, that it's in our nervous systems, that as soon as we've poured our grief out and it's been received and we've been held, our next sort of move is to hold the next person, you know, that our grief touches somebody else, and then they might, you know, I mean, I'm not necessarily literally mean fall down, but it's like to fall into the grief. And there's something about that is really strengthening. So for me, there's something about doing it in a group, and it's not that one-to-one work, you know, I've been a therapist and I see it and I do one-to-one work, that really has its place. But there's something about doing it in a group together that I just think has a real magic. That, like I said, it so was never there in my upbringing. And, you know, like Jody, I had such a journey to get to it, to find my way to it. And yeah, I wouldn't want to carry my life on without it. And for me, that's part of it. We don't have to be experts to hold each other beautifully in our grief. We can each be the banks of the river for each other. And I'm going to use that as a lead into this practice that we're going to do. So some of you may have done it or something similar. And it's, we call it writing shuttles. Jody, you were calling it writing prompts. But it's just to take a bit of time to start with a few words that are going to take you towards just writing. And the idea, we use this word shuttle, so that your words just carry your pen across the paper. So the invitation is to not be thinking, but to just see what comes. Let there be a flow to the words coming out of your pen. And if writing's not really your thing and words aren't your thing, maybe that you just make marks on the paper. Maybe there's just an energy, maybe there's an image or shapes. And that's totally fine for it to come like that as well. And if that's none of these work, you know, please find your own way with it. So Dita's going to put some suggested prompts into the chat window. The ones that we're suggesting, but you may have one that you've worked with or something that really stirs you. And, you know, Jody, if there's something you want to add, please do that. So one is my heart. Just, you know, like Jody was saying, our grief and our love, they're like this, two sides of the same coin, inseparable. What does your heart want to say? Another prompt might just be the word why. And another one might be a feeling. My tears are for, my shame is for, my rage is for, my fear, my numbness, my whatever it is. And it may be that different feelings want to come. Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge, you know, this is just such a tiny taste. It's a tiny, tiny drop that we're inviting us all to share today. and acknowledging that, you know, that may not feel kind, or it may not feel honouring of how much there is, or the intensity of what each of us is with, but the invitation for today was just to have a little taster, and then, you know, there's more spaces coming with us, but with others, Jody's work, you know. So yeah, signposting at the end to places where we can do more.
I also want to name that it's not only grief, and there is, somebody also says that I don't normally manage to express much anger, but it came out today, and that, like you were saying, both of you, Jody and Sophie, before, that it's not just grief. Grief has so many flavors. That energy is stored inside of us, and the ways it comes out can be quite different. And how much, at least in my personal experience, anger is one of those emotions that I was very judged as a woman, that is not easy to express. So your anger is so welcome. Is that part of our grief that very rarely gets to be heard. Yeah.
So for me, the intention of holding grief circles and coming towards grief isn't about staying there. It is about really letting ourselves feel what it is, and then feeling when we're ready to move on and for something else to come, but in its own time. But thank you for bringing that energy as well. And I really hear that decade that you've spent in that place. Yeah, thank you. Jody, is there anything you want to respond to?
I'd just like to say, for me, you know, as someone who is kind of in a good place with her childlessness, how incredibly moving it is to be here in this sacred and very honest space, and how it is awakening my grief. It is with me. I'm feeling your grief. I'm feeling my grief. I was very moved by what Ellen and Gail said. I have a sense of moving towards my horizon, Gail, and wondering what shape my grief will take on the next part of my life. But also just being reminded by the honesty here of the rawness of my own loss that is a part of me. And, you know, speaking to Sargam, who we met, our paths crossed many years ago, it is possible to come through this, and grief is the door. It is the door. The deep feelings are actually the door to another level, if you do it with support and love. And there are women who have taken the journey ahead of you, and we have our hands down that well to help you up. Okay, thank you.
We're just going to move towards a little closing, and we thought it'd be nice to close again with the little paired sharing. So just a bit of time. You know, one of the things that I keep hearing is how alone we often are with this, you know, whether we're with others, but, you know, sometimes we're alone on our own with it as well. So just to take this opportunity in this gathering, just to have a little bit more time with each other, and just to have a few minutes to share, you know, what are you taking from this? You know, what's nourished, what's been challenging, you know, whatever your experience is, that there's no right way of being at this moment. And again, maybe one person shares first, and then it's the other person can just say, you know, I'm here, I hear you, or I'm with you, or something like that, just so there's an acknowledgement of what we've heard. I think our last thing to do together is just to close our ceremony.
Right.
So if you have a candle or water, you might just want to pour water for anything that's been moving for you. And I love that idea that, you know, we can pour water, that there's a way that the water can receive our feelings, and inviting you at the end of this, to give that in some way to the earth. And I sometimes offer it as a blessing. And I imagine, you know, whatever we put in and our good intentions, may that go out into the world. And maybe one day molecules of those water will rise up into the sky and fall on your head as rain. But, you know, may that water bless every being in our affirmation of life and love. That for me is absolutely at the core of the intention of this gathering. And then let's blow out our candles together. So, and again, just feeling this circle, you know, that so often we're on our own, how it is to be with others, sharing some intention, some shared journey, even though each of our journeys is unique. So as we blow out the candle, this light goes out, but connection in our hearts, you know, the connection that's present goes on with us. Wonderful. So I'm so grateful to Alison who called this in. This is your vision, Alison, and I feel like I'm going away feeling really enriched, you know, and touched again by my own journey and my grief in that journey. It's really wonderful to meet you, Jody, and I want to really honor the work that you've done in creating this community, because, you know, I feel like you've been right at the center of naming this and inviting people and you know, generating this wonderful field of connection and support, you know, that I feel like I'm sort of touching into. So huge thank you all for coming. May you find whatever you need. If we don't want to do too much of a promotion, but we're running workshops. Jody, I don't know, do you want to say a last bit about what you're offering as well? And if anybody wants to stay, if anyone has questions about workshops, either that Jody's running or that we're running, you know, please stay on and maybe we can just have a bit of a chat. So Dita's been putting the website details of our website. Jody, many of you know. And yeah, we sent connections. Jody, do you want to just add anything about what's coming up for you?
Very briefly, those of you who don't know, the website is gateway-women.com. We have a private membership community with members from all over the world that you'd be very welcome to join. You can find details for that on the website. And we also have our Reignite weekend, which some of you may have already done, is going online. So we will be running kind of our sort of signature transformational weekend online. The first one's full up, which is at the beginning of October, but then we're running it again at the beginning of November. And I just want to say, you know, I'm so proud to be a part of this work, and I will, you know, I will support you and help you, you know, to help people find you, because what you're doing is unique and beautiful and precious, and I want to support it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jody. So we've got workshops coming up. Stay on the call if you want more information. Check it out on the website. We're doing this series of workshops around childlessness, and if there's other griefs that you want a space for, we're running workshops mainly online at the moment. We're really hoping to get some running in person, but I know that we're distributed all over the place. So there is a beauty to the online work that we can come together in ways that we can't meet in a room or a field somewhere. So let's just, if everybody wants to unmute and just, you know, say whatever your last word is in a sort of cacophony of Zoom noisiness, let's have a go at that. Maybe a word of whatever you're taking, and may there be good support and loving holding wherever you're moving to next.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Community,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Love and light.
Journey well.
So much love.
Bye.
We're in this together.
Peace and thank
Bye,
you.
Jody.
Bye. Bye, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
So much to the creator and the facilitators. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was so special. This is amazing. I hope it stays online because there's not much going on in the US over here with this stuff.
Okay.
It's a lot based in the UK. So I'm really grateful to be able to be part of it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.